All right, so here's the roll sheet for today. I had anticipated doing a group critical thinking challenge and having a drop box for that you would put into, but since we're a little bit behind in the schedule, I'm going to do an individual critical thinking challenge, and I'm going to ask you this question: what is justice to begin with? And you can talk some and give a cogent answer to what you think justice is. You can get some individual points that will be added to your first exam score. So the way that will work is that if you get a 70 and you have 5 bonus points added, you have a 75. Or if you have a 75, you have an 80 on the exam score. So this is an opportunity for you to get exam scores built up in advance so that you don't have to sweat it quite so much when it comes to the actual exam. So it's an opportunity for you to engage with me, show me, and give me some data points on you that will justify a higher grade at the end of the semester. And it's somewhat objective because I'm giving you an opportunity to respond. And you either talked or you didn't, and you were somewhat cogent or you weren't. So what is justice? Let's start with the first question. Who wants to tackle that? What is justice? So today we're talking about ethics in integrated marketing communication and the marketing discipline overall. So what is justice?
It's like a set of morals and ethics that we sort of kind of base our lives around, like whether we determine what is right and wrong.
Okay, so it's a set of morals and ethics that we use to determine right or wrong. How should we set those up? What should be included in those?
I mean, that just depends on how we were raised, really, whether it be religion or whether it be culture.
Okay, so religion plays a part in our thinking about justice, maybe? Okay.
It's super subjective because what might be justified for one person might not be justice. Like people can define it differently. So like it goes back to the religion thing. So justice is like when you think of justice, you can think of like if a court ruling, there's some people who think justice has been served and there's people who don't. So I think there's room to agree and disagree.
Okay, so you think it's super subjective. So it's up to the individual.
It is.
Yeah.
Because even if you don't have religion, whenever you're older, you decide the kind of person that you want to be. I feel like.
And
Whether you're religious or not. Sorry, go ahead.
There's basic principles that like pretty much like a good majority of people agree on, but
Okay, so is it
it's
super subjective then? If we agree on there's a majority of principles that we agree on?
so it's subjective to an extent in which to which extreme you follow each principle. Because like there's certain morals and standards that everybody's like, that's not okay. But there's like if you think about like courts and stuff like that, like one sentence might make sense to somebody and not another. So it's just like to what extent there's like a spectrum.
Okay, so within a principle you think there is a range of possibilities that we can have within that basic framework. Give me an example, a substantive example that might relate to advertising and promotion and integrated marketing communication. What would be a basic principle that would relate to advertising that you think we could all agree on?
So I think you could go back to like pretty much any social issue. So if you look at like H&M's ads, like clearly not okay, right? But some people will say that they could get a slap on the wrist, or other people want further action taken and lawsuits and things like that.
Okay, so what did H&M do? For anybody who doesn't know, I'm not sure I know what H&M, what the problem is with H&M's ads.
They had an ad that was definitely racial in nature. That was pretty controversial. I don't actually know what they did with it.
It was
too closely.
what is it, coolest monkey in the jungle, and it was like a young African American kid that was wearing it.
Yeah.
And like the mom, I'm pretty sure the ad was actually in the UK, but the mom was like, it's not.
There's nothing wrong with it. Why is everyone
Like I didn't, like I was
They had a whole
throughout the whole
line and
deal.
stuff like that, and that they said stuff like King of the Jungle, and
Yeah.
I don't remember what the other ones were, but they were relating to animals, and that one just happened to
Strike a nerve.
Yeah.
Okay. This has struck a nerve in political speech in America. There's been a primary election this week on Tuesday for the governorship in Florida. And Florida, of course, is a big critical state for both parties. And one of the reasons that governorships for a national level are sort of interesting from a political marketing standpoint is that A, governors often run for president. Jeb Bush was a governor of Florida and decided to run for president. His brother was governor of Texas and parlayed that into being president of the United States, which, by the way, being governor of Texas is not good training ground for being president of the United States, because the governor in Texas is actually the fourth most powerful office in Texas, behind the lieutenant governor. Because the lieutenant governor, by virtue of his office and his position as the presiding officer of the Senate, actually has more budgetary control in Texas than the governor does. And so the governor doesn't actually propose a budget in Texas. There's a budget committee, and that's chaired by the president of the Senate, who happens to be the lieutenant governor. And nothing gets done in government without money. So the governor of Texas is not actually a very good job for being president of the United States. But
Everybody signed that?
we seem to think so. So there's a governor's election in Florida, and this relates to integrated marketing communication, because one of the things he did is he got on television, so he's going to communicate to his constituents about why he's better than the other candidate. The other candidate is the mayor of Tallahassee, who's the Democrat nominee. And he said he's an articulate person, he's a good showman, and we don't want to monkey this up. And everybody went crazy on that, because they said that the fact that they pointed out the fact that he was articulate and he happens to be African American is got racial overtones. You would never say that. You would never say a white guy is articulate, because it's just sort of, their argument is that it's assumed that they're articulate. But of course, we've seen lots of issues where white people aren't necessarily articulate. George W. Bush mangled the English language from the word go. Donald Trump seems to have no command of it, in spite of the fact that he says things like, I know the best words, I've got the best words. I know big words, big, beautiful words, like bigly. What? Okay, you know, George W. Bush. People tend to misunderestimate me. You know? Too many good docs are getting out of the business. Too many good docs, too many OBGYNs, this is a George Bushism, are not able to practice their love with women all over America. Couldn't speak, right? So what about those ads, the H&M ads, is wrong? Or is that just, at one point in time, nobody would have thought, if we went back again, talking about the Aunt Jemima ads in the 1950s, nobody thought much about that at the time. Nobody thought much about having all kinds of sports teams used Indians in full headdress as their mascot. The Seminoles still do. Yeah.
I think that just shows that, like, it's ever changing, so it kind of depends on what's going on.
Okay.
So it's not only subjective, but it's mercurial. It just depends.
All right.
As things change and as different experiences occur, somebody might be like, okay, I didn't like how that went. And so, like, the example with H&M, he said that the mom didn't think it was a big deal, but there's still a huge outcry and uproar about it. I think that shows how the extremes of the spectrum and how, like, it could be justified in one mind and not in another.
Okay. So we're not even able to agree on whether or not it really is a bad thing, because you've got the mother of the child in the ad saying, this is perfectly acceptable, and you have other persons of ethnic origins that are not, you know, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, because the ads aired in Britain, is that right? Is that what you're telling me? And so we can't say they're African Americans, because they have people from Africa that are in Great Britain, and they're obviously not African Americans. They've been from the African colonies that Britain used to control, and they immigrated into the UK by and large. They didn't have as much slavery in Britain as we did in the United States. But they had colonies that they administered for many, many years that were part of the British Empire, and those people immigrated when they had the right to at various times to Great Britain. And so there are obviously people who are darker than others that are in Great Britain that may or may not be offended by the ad, even though the specific mother is not. When I was first becoming a young professor, Abercrombie and Fitch had a lot of controversial ads. They had hired, at that point in time, a homosexual photographer to do a lot of their display ads in their stores, and the ads were enormously homoerotic if you looked at them. You all are too young to remember this, but they showed a lot of shirtless men in various poses that were
Just wearing
suggestive.
jeans, right?
I think they used
Just
to
wearing
have
jeans.
guys that stood out front of the stores, actually.
Mhm.
That might have been Hollister that
Yeah,
did that,
Hollister.
but I,
Yeah, they used to have like live models or something.
Yeah, Abercrombie had these big, I remember them in the stores, and it would be guys that were, they would have like a football, but they would be holding each other in various poses that were I've never seen that maneuver on a football field, let me put it that way. So, they were controversial, and people said, you shouldn't do that, that's promoting an alternative lifestyle. That has been one of the greatest movements in terms of civil rights that has occurred the fastest. It took a long time for us to get the civil rights movement for African Americans. It took a lot of struggle. The next great wave in civil rights movement was the women's movement. And that took a long time. And I thought that the gay rights movement would take a long time. And it is one that, I don't think anybody today really seriously questions whether or not we're going to overturn the Obergefell decision, which legalized gay marriage in all 50 states. Because at this point in time, I think the court, as much as they didn't agree with it, you have a majority of the court now that would not have agreed to find the way they did in the Obergefell decision. But I think you have a majority of the court that would recognize that you can't go back. You can't take away those rights of people that already have them. It would create chaos in our court systems to do that. You have these families now that have adopted children, or they have bought property together, and they have taken that property as tenants of the entirety in some states that allow you to do that. And so I think the court recognizes, I think if that decision were to be relitigated today before the court, I think they recognize that they're probably not going to go back. Now, how much more they're willing to expand it, we'll see. A recent employer has fired a transgendered woman when she came out to them. She works at a funeral home, and she's decided to transition, and she's been fired. Now, I think she's probably, with the current makeup of the court, likely to lose, because that's not a public actor, and we have a different standard for public actors, which are the state and state governments and the federal government and private actors. And so we've seen this big movement, and I don't think if you put those ads up in Abercrombie and Fitch today, those sort of ad things where they're scantily clad and they're in various poses that were, I think, somewhat suggestive, I don't think there would be the outcry that there was back in the early 2000s and the late 1990s for that. And so you see an element of what Mr. Young is saying, that ethics seems to be subjective. We can't even decide on whether or not these ads and these sort of marketing techniques are good. How are we going to come up with a standard? And I think that's a challenge. But what does justice then have to do with marketing? Well, I think the discussion in here that we're having sort of exemplifies what it has to do with marketing. Obviously, we think about people's rights, and advertising and promotion deal with those rights. How do we portray consumers in our society? What protections should we have for those consumers in society? We are one of only 2 nations that allows direct-to-consumer advertising of pharmaceutical medication. If you can tell me what the other one is, I'll give you 10 bonus points on on the first exam. For those of you who had me, you should know this. This should come tripping on top of the other country that allows direct-to-consumer advertising in pharmaceutical products is.
Maybe
Oh,
like
somebody's going to Google it.
advertising.
What is it?
Is it Canada?
Nope, it's not Canada. They don't allow it.
Germany.
Mexico?
It's not Germany, not China,
Mexico?
France.
not Mexico.
Countries.
Japan.
It's not Japan,
France.
not France,
Russia?
not Russia.
New Zealand.
It's New Zealand.
Aw.
Yay, somebody got the answer by using
Get
their
those
phone.
people.
Using Google.
He doesn't
Using
even
the
know what
resources.
Well, you all have the same opportunity there. He gets the points because he took the time and the imagination to actually Google it. It's New Zealand. Now, we generally think that that's a good thing, that people have access to information. Other countries don't think it's such a good thing. They think that you need to have a doctor evaluate you. So what we have in the United States as a result of advertising to consumers is we have people going in and telling their doctor what they want in advance. They schedule appointments with their doctor. Our ads encourage you to do that. Think about the ads for Prozac and Zoloft and all of these things. They encourage you. Talk to your doctor. If your depression medication isn't working for you, talk to your doctor about, Cymbalta or whatever. Can't sleep? Talk to your doctor
It's
about
kind of crazy because I
Lunesta.
don't even ever realize that, I'm just thinking that it's a, whether, I don't know, maybe an allergy commercial or whatever.
No,
And
they
it's got that
encourage
at the
you.
end of it, and you're like,
They encourage you to go talk to their, and people do. People go into their doctor and say, oh my God, I can't sleep. I need Lunesta, which one of my friends refers to as the devil's aspirin, because his wife has almost divorced him because he gets up in the middle of the night after taking Lunesta and starts cooking, and he almost set the house on fire.
wait, what?
So-
Is he aware of it?
No.
Sounds like Ambien then.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that have any of the sleep medications. That's one of the side effects, is that you may not remember what you're doing. And she woke up with the fire alarms blazing in the house one night, and he was frying bacon and had started a grease fire on the stove while blaring music at the top of the stereo's speakers. They have a big enough house that the kids didn't hear it in their bedrooms, but when the alarms all went off, and so he refers to it as the devil's aspirin. And what we have people going in and saying, I want this because I can't sleep.
Then you burn your house down.
And other countries say, maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we shouldn't encourage people to do that. In the past, what would have happened, rather than you going in and saying, I think I need Lunesta because I just can't sleep, what would you have done? You would have gone in and you said to your doctor, I'm really exhausted. I don't sleep well. And then they would have talked to you about this. But because the insurance companies work in such a way that doctors have about 5 minutes to talk to you on a visit, they just write you the script. They don't actually say things like, what would be a good way of doing this? Well, in other countries that have more socialized medicine and doctors don't have, for example, they can take a greater period of time in Great Britain because they're not paid necessarily by the number of patients they see in a given period of time. And so they can actually do evaluations like, let's think about what are the factors that may be affecting your sleep. Rather than just starting out by pushing a pill on you, which is what doctors in America, you can't sleep, try Lunesta. You set your house on fire, well, let's switch to Ambien and see if that's any better. That's not working, let's try Cymbalta. These are all pills that have been used, and Cymbalta is great. It's supposed to be for everything. Like you can use it for sleeping, you can use it for anxiety. I think they've approved it for fibromyalgia. It's just like, it's incredible, all these things. And so people go in and they say, well, maybe what you should have is you should have a doctor that says things like, are you stressed? Why are you stressed out? Because one of the reasons that you may not be sleeping is not because you just don't sleep, it's because you're worried about something. Maybe if you can eliminate that, or you can figure that out, maybe that's a better solution. Lots of people in America are not getting the sleep they need because they do things like they watch television in their bedrooms. That's one of the worst things you could do. The light from TV actually affects your ability to fall asleep. Certain light wave frequencies keep you awake. They are an alert to your circadian rhythm that you need to be up. So how many of you watch television while you're in bed? Horrible, you shouldn't do that.
It puts me to sleep.
What?
It actually puts me to sleep.
You think that?
Yeah, it actually, I used to watch TV, like, kind of like the same thing, like I always had to have it on to fall asleep.
Yeah.
But I guess, I don't know,
Sleep experts will tell you, go watch television in the living room. And when you get sleepy, go to bed. And make sure the bedroom is dark.
yeah, I also heard like you're not supposed to just like lay in your bed for like during the middle of the day, like doing your homework or something like
No,
that.
you're not.
It should be a place to like where you just go
Yeah, I don't do
specifically
my
for
homework.
sleep,
No.
which I.
Lots of
still
people
don't
do
get
all
much
kinds of
but
things
it's-
in their bedroom. And doctors will, sleep specialists will tell you that you shouldn't do anything. If you want to watch television, go watch television in the living room. And go sleep in your bedroom. That's about the only thing you should do. Now, nobody does that, right? That's just not necessarily. But there are these other things. Rather than instantly going towards the drug, well, maybe you should think about these things. Now, the good part about advertising and the allowance of advertising of pharmaceuticals in the United States is that a lot of things that used to be taboo to talk about, we talk about now. We talk about depression as a result of the fact that they advertise for Prozac and Zoloft and all of these Cymbalta and all these other drugs on television. We actually have conversations. At one point in time, my father is a retired special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and he was not just an FBI agent, he was a SAIC, a special agent in charge of a field office for the Federal Bureau of Investigations. At the time he went into the FBI, he went in under J. Edgar Hoover, and every FBI agent had to meet the director. And if you'd ever been seen by a psychiatrist or a doctor for anxiety or depression, that was an a priori bar to your being able to get a job in the Federal Bureau of Investigations, because it was viewed as you were crazy, you were cuckoo. And the fact that we advertise these things have made people aware and reasonably comfortable in talking about them. And so there may be a good side or an upside to advertising or direct-to-consumer advertising of this kind of products. So my next question is, why should we study philosophy? And I'll answer that one for you. In marketing and integrated marketing communication? Well, the highest degree that you can earn, so we're going to talk a lot about some things that are very abstract, is the PhD. It's the Doctor of Philosophy. It's the degree I have. So my field of specialization is marketing ethics, and you get the PhD. Dr. Workgray, who's our department chair, has a PhD, and her field of specialization is marketing with an emphasis on things like consumer behavior. And so why should we study philosophy and marketing and integrated communications, integrated marketing communications? Well, one, it's an activity that focuses our thought, and that's going to be really critical in thinking about these things. We really need to think critically about what it is we're saying and how we're saying it, and things that we may think we're communicating to people in our advertisements and in our communications may not be what they're receiving as a result of a lot of things. So philosophy answers three great questions that are relevant to all disciplines, all people, all societies, at all times. And those are the questions of knowledge, which we break down in philosophy. And that was my first love, by the way, was philosophy. I wanted to be a classical letters major, and then I realized you couldn't do anything with that degree, and so I went and got a degree in political science so I could go to law school. But I really wanted to do a lot of philosophy, and so I took a lot of courses in philosophy, and I really liked it. But they make a lot less. If you go over across, again, the parking lot to Hippie Dippy over there and the philosophy department, those guys start out at about $42,000 a year, and marketing professors start out at about $160,000 a year, so you can kind of do the math and figure out why I chose. I'm horribly utilitarian in that. So the question of knowledge we break down into two subfields in philosophy. One is called epistemology, which is the study of what is it I can know and how can I know it. Now this is not trivial. What is it I can know and how can I know it? And when we think about ads, we really have to think about what is it that we can know and how can we know it? So, for example, if I ask you, what is this that I'm pointing at here? For those of you who've had me, you're going to be able to tell me instantly that it's a what?
Desk, no, table.
It's a table. Why is it a table?
I forgot what you said, but I remember that.
What?
We use it as a table.
Because we use it, what makes it a table? Just the use that it's put to?
Societal norms tell us this is a table.
Why isn't it a desk? If we're talking about how you're using it, how are you using it? First of all, this, what is this then?
I guess you can use table and desk as interchangeable terms.
Is this a table or is this a desk? That's a desk?
Or table.
This is a table. But that table looks nothing. This table is round. That table is rectangular. That one is less rectangular, but still. So how do we know that this is a table and not a desk? How do we know that that's, I mean, is it the shape that makes it a table?
4 legs.
So all tables have 4 legs.
I'd say generally a desk is for one person, not multiple. That's,
What about a partner's desk? Those are
it's
specifically
part of
built.
a desk, then, not a desk.
Not a desk. So all desks, or all tables have 4 legs.
No,
How many legs does that table have? 4. 4.
This one, and this one has 4.
Are there really 4 legs?
Well, it's 2 tables,
Oh,
well, 1,
okay.
or 2 total.
I don't know. Is that 1 leg or 2 on this end of the table?
Well, what is this then?
It looks like 1 leg that's bifurcated to me.
Is this a table or a desk?
That's a podium.
I don't
Or is
know.
it a podium?
I'm not sure.
Does it shrink?
Does it go down?
It probably does.
I think that's low, you guys. Never mind.
It was a table, now
That's a
desk.
desk.
No, that's a desk.
That's a
Yeah.
desk.
That's a desk.
Oh, absolutely.
It might be a partner desk. I probably, I'd look for one more.
It's true, I think I could fit my papers on there.
I look at the corner.
I don't know.
I don't know what that is. This is not a very good table. It's a little wobbly. You see how difficult this is? If we can't agree on this, I think that's a desk. Because that's what you're using it for, is a desk.
It's called that one.
What do you use a table for?
You use a table to eat on, don't you? Isn't that what a table's for? Isn't that the purpose of a table? Of course, there are library tables, which are used specifically to study on. You don't eat on them. Although, if you go to the library, there's lots of people eating on the library tables.
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
but
but
you
you
don't
don't
usually
get
have a
it.
snack in here, so.
Mhm.
Then you have the little desk too.
Then you have a little, so you eat at your desk.
Well, they have some like at the very end of the room.
This is very confusing.
They have tables and then they have little desks. Have you seen those, like the personal ones?
Right?
Yeah, I used to watch Netflix and eat like something.
So that's a study, so that, is that a desk or is that a study carrel?
What is it, study?
That's used interchangeably with the word desk.
Why have 2 words for the same thing?
I don't know.
You can use it for different things.
Yeah, why have
It means different
synonyms?
names.
Yeah, why?
The table is multi-purpose and the desk is just for studying.
Okay, so we don't have desks in offices. Because people don't study in offices.
I'm
Do they?
really just lost right now. Honest, I'm just so lost on
I'm
the point of
questioning
what
everything.
we
Right, exactly, and if we can't decide what this is, how the hell are we gonna decide what it is that we can tell our customers no for certain? And if we can't even get this, something as simple as this object, if we can't, now think about trying to market the drug, What's the one that's for fibromyalgia now? What's the big fibro drug? Lyrica, that's it, Lyrica. Let's look at the ad for Lyrica. Let's see if we can find the Lyrica commercial.
To most people, I look like most people. But on the inside, I feel chronic, widespread pain. Fibromyalgia may be invisible to others, but my pain is real.
Fibromyalgia is thought to be caused by overactive nerves. Lyrica is believed to calm these nerves.
I'm glad my doctor prescribed Lyrica.
For some, Lyrica delivers effective relief from fibromyalgia pain and improves function. Lyrica may cause serious allergic reactions, suicidal thoughts or actions. Tell your doctor right away if you have these: new or worse depression, unusual changes in mood or behavior, swelling, trouble breathing, rash, hives, blisters, muscle pain with fever, tired feeling, or blurry vision. Common side effects: dizziness, sleepiness, weight gain, swelling of hands, legs, and feet. Don't drink alcohol while taking Lyrica. Don't drive or use machinery until you know how Lyrica affects you. Those who've had a drug or alcohol problem may be more likely to misuse Lyrica.
With less pain, I can do more.
Ask your doctor about Lyrica. If you're eligible, you can pay as little as $25 a month.
This reminds me of that commercial that's like, my name's blah blah blah, and I'm addicted to crack cocaine. You guys know that? And then
So
it's like
let's-
that fake doctor.
Let's think about that ad. Let's think about that ad for just 1 second. Fibromyalgia is believed, we don't even know what the hell the cause is of this disease. Maybe this disease is caused by something called iatrogenesis. Do you know what that is? Oh, you have no idea what that, I didn't know what it was either until I heard it in a congressional hearing and I had to look up the word. What is iatrogenesis? It means a disease or condition that is caused by the diagnosis of a physician. A disease or condition that is caused by the diagnosis of a physician.
So does that mean just like basically they're stating like what they feel and then you think you
Couldn't that also be
need it?
subjective?
Like,
Yeah, I mean, like how many, one of the things we know is that if a doctor tells you that, you know, you're sick, you'll probably get sick.
yeah.
You know, I mean, if they say, oh my God, you look like death warmed over.
It's kind of like getting on I know sometimes I'll get on like WebMD, like I have a sore throat. And
And you have cancer.
You have
Yeah.
cancer.
Yeah.
Got
Every time.
And I'm like,
Right.
shit,
I think the
need
worst
to
is
go
when
to
you're
the
a guy and it shows it says you're pregnant and like, what?
Yeah.
That's happened for
The thing that got me was right out of the chute, it said what it was like believed to be, and then it said Lyrica is believed to do.
Right, like we don't even
It
know.
was like, oh.
So you can
okay.
see how
So it's
hard.
believed to do it.
Right, you can
Okay.
see how hard this is to really, when we think about, we think we know what we know, and a lot of times we don't know what we know. We can't even decide whether this is a table, a podium, a desk, a partner's desk. So it makes it really difficult. So these are not trivial, and I don't think that we need to necessarily go up in a balloon over this, but what I'm trying to emphasize here is that as you develop and as you go out into the world of marketing and you are working on communication, think about what it is you can know and how you say things. And don't try and prove, particularly for those of you that are going into sales, one of the things that I think you really should be cogent and cognizant of is don't make claims you can't support. That's one of the biggest things that's going to lead to horrible, and personal selling is a part of integrated marketing communication, horrible problems in the sales field. So this is not trivial, just coming up with what we can know and how we can know it. The other part is reality, metaphysics, the study of reality. Well, that is way beyond the scope of this course, and so I won't even go into whether or not I'm you, you're me, we're the wall, and this is a grand illusion, which is what the Buddhists would tell us, right? I mean, and once you realize that, you reach nirvana, and there's a state of nothingness and bliss, and isn't that great? We all go off into the happy abyss of nothing more. But that's way beyond the scope of this course, so we won't talk a lot about metaphysics, but we will talk a lot about what we can know, and what we say we're saying, and how we can know it, how we come to agreement on these ideas of terms. The second great question that philosophy attempts to answer is the question of conduct, which we call moral philosophy, and the third is governance. And of course, all three of these have an issue in integrated marketing communication. How can I know that I'm getting a clear message across through the noise to my customer constituent or person that I'm trying to influence? What conduct is acceptable in producing that message? Should I be able to influence them? How should I be able to influence them? Is their will overborne? And of course, the question of governance. As I pointed out here, we're one of only 2 nations that allows direct consumer advertising of pharmaceutical products. Other countries don't allow as much advertising as we do, period. And so the question of governance comes into play in that the regulatory environments that we'll deal with as marketers and as people who are engaged in integrated marketing communication, of course, become relevant to our thoughts and our discussions. So there are some challenges to philosophical ethics, and we've seen some of those in the discussion that we've talked about today. And we started out with Chris saying that, well, it's subjective. My battery is dying. I hope this doesn't go dead before I finish class. It's going to be really bad if it does. Subjectivism. Subjectivism is the belief that there are no a priori truths. That's spelled A, next word, A-P-R-I-O-R-I. There are no a priori truths. Well, what is an a priori truth? A priori truths are things that you don't have to experience to know. You don't have to experience them to know. As opposed to a posteriori, which is A, next word P-O-S-T-O-R-I, which are things that you have to know through the experience of engagement. Nobody knows how to ride a bicycle right off the bat. But you probably don't have to experience being shot to know that you don't want it. Right? Nobody says, yep, shoot me, can't wait. Blow my head off. Nobody has to experience that to know you probably don't want it. So subjectivism says there are none of these things that we can know a priori, but I think there is at least one. Most people don't want to be shot. Even if they want to die, they generally don't want somebody to just blow their head off. They want, I mean, if we were talking about physician-assisted suicide, they want to go gently into the good night, not violently into the good night. So I think we can know something like don't kill. We know that people generally like life, as opposed to something that you have to experience, like riding a bike. And of course, these two things come into play because when we talk about higher order ethics, we're going to be dealing with a priori abstractions. But when we get to concrete examples, we're going to have to deal with a lot of our experiences in the a posteriori. Cultural relativism. Now, what's wrong with subjectivism? If we accepted subjectivism as true, that there are no universal truths that we can know in all places at all times, it would be a war of all against all. This would be the Hobbesian, Leviathan state of nature. Hobbes in Leviathan imagines what it was like before we had civilized society. And he says it was a war of all against all. If you could get something from somebody else because you were bigger, you took it. What's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is that you're not always going to be the biggest person on the block. Somebody bigger will come along and take your stuff. So he says we give up some of our rights in this absolute state of nature in order for security. which leads us to cultural relativism. Hobbes says we form governments in order to be able to live in a civilized society. In order to be able to engage in marketing, we have to have some assurance that we can sell goods and services and that people will pay us for them, and if they don't, that there are repercussions for that. And we have to be able to get those to them in various ways. That's called logistics, and that's provided for by paying taxes. We give up some of these things that we don't want. We'd like to keep everything that we get, but we have to pay so that we can have some greater good. So a cultural relativist would say that it's not the individual that decides what is, and we heard some of this from some of you, it's the culture in which we're born. So as Ms. Lopez suggested, religion plays a part. That's part of our culture. Did I get the name wrong?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Reyes.
Reyes. I have a Lopez in my other, I apologize. Ms. Reyes. Say I can't even get the name straight.
Sorry I gave you that look.
That's all right. I do have a Lopez in my first class, and that was just, so I apologize. I will get it right next time, I promise. Religion plays a part in this. Now the problem is with cultural relativism is that if we accept cultural relativism as being true, you could say that all kinds of things are okay. It's perfectly acceptable to engage in genocide and to promote and benefit and profit from that genocide. There's a Nicolas Cage movie in which he plays a arms dealer selling arms and trafficking in arms in Africa, where there are ethnic genocides going about among various tribes in the country. What happened when the British and the French largely carved up Africa is they just said, well, we want this, because they wanted the natural resources here, and we'll give you this in exchange for that. And they created countries where there are not necessarily natural boundaries in terms of ethnic groups, because they wanted what was there. So if you take, for example, I study African political systems, Kenya, it's made up of a number of ethnic groups, and they don't all necessarily get along. And so the boundaries that we created have created problems, or that the British created and the French created, and to the lesser extent the Dutch and some others that engaged in sort of a empire building exercise. And so could we say that that's okay in those societies where we have ethnic cleansing? Well, after World War II, we were less willing to say that as a people. And we have laws that restrict selling arms to various groups and factions. You can't just go and sell. We have prohibitions against, for example, selling arms. If you are an American gun manufacturer, missile manufacturer, or whatever, plane manufacturer, that Boeing is a big manufacturer of military-grade aircraft, you can't sell those things to certain countries because we say that they engage in ethnic cleansing. You can't sell airplanes to Syria because they'll use them against their own people. We think that's wrong. So cultural relativism is attractive because we see it happening, but we do say that there are certain universal norms to which we're not going to go below. We're not going to let Iran, engage in the use of nuclear weapons. Although I'm not sure we're going to be able to stop it. We certainly have not been very successful in stopping North Korea in getting nuclear weapons. And so, there are these things. But generally speaking, by and large, we have said nuclear armament is a bad thing and we shouldn't encourage it. And we sure as hell shouldn't use it. There have only been 2 nuclear arms used in war. They were both used by the United States. And after that experience, the world pretty much said, that's not something we should do. The third form of challenge to ethics is what we call psychological egoism. Now the other two sound right, they sound plausible, but they're actually easy to dispense with, because if you accepted subjectivism as true, we couldn't have any society. If we just said we're going to let everybody decide what's right and wrong, we couldn't form any society at all. We would have to resort to the state of nature and the war of all against all. And if you upset me in my class, I could take out my .357 Magnum and smite you and go about my business, which I might like to do, particularly if you fall asleep in my class. I have a concealed carry permit. I think justice should be swift. I had a student tell me in my student evaluations last semester, "You're not funny." Well, yes, I am. I'm highly entertaining. Trust me on this. And if you fall asleep, you're just a candidate for natural deselection because you don't find me funny. You're apparently not bright enough to even remember to breathe, which is why your little head is falling forward on the table or whatever. No, we can't do that, right? We can't let Granny Geary decide which students live and die simply by the sheer force of his personality. No, we can't do that. We can't accept that. If we accepted the cultural relativist position, we couldn't say Germany under Adolf Hitler was wrong, and we do. We don't accept that. We can't say that ethnic cleansing in a lot of countries is wrong. And we do. We do say that's wrong. And so those sound right, but they're easy to dispense with. The third one doesn't sound right, and yet it's the hardest to dispense with. Psychological egoism is what we call a deterministic philosophy, in that it says that we really can't help but respond the way we respond to stimuli, either as a result of nature or nurture. You will respond to things in very predictable ways. You think you have free will, but it's illusory. You don't have free will. Now this sounds crazy. You think that you have free will, but maybe you don't. What is the difference genetically? I'm sure the biologists here on campus are going to be horrified by my very simplistic genetic example. But what genetically makes a male Homo sapien different from a female Homo sapien? So we're talking about male people, male human beings, and female human beings. What makes them different? Chromosomes. What chromosome in particular?
X, X,
Yeah, females are what? Males are
X, Y.
XY. So everyone who has a Y chromosome in here, raise your hand. If you have a Y chromosome, raise your hand. Raise your hand if you have a Y chromosome.
Sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
You all raised your hands. Why did you do that? Because the teacher told you to. You're trained from a very early age to, people might, oh, you're not sure? Might look at you. Are you questioning? You all raised your hands. Every single one of you raised your hands. You thought you had free will, but you raised your hands. There's pressure. For those of you that didn't raise your hands, I looked at you and I finally got you to raise your hand. So do you really have free will? Well, you think you do. Can you will yourself to not want something? Think about this. What is it that you really, really have wanted in your life? Can you will yourself to not want that? Students always tell me they can't. You can will yourself to not want something. Students always tell me, yeah, I can will myself to not want something. What is it you really like?
Taco Bell.
Taco Bell. Why do you really like Taco Bell?
Because it's cheap.
It's cheap,
I know exactly what I'm gonna get, kind of like McDonald's,
okay, but different.
but different.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I can't really explain. I wouldn't say it's high quality food, but I still enjoy it.
Okay. You like the texture, you like the taste,
Yes.
all of that combination together.
All of
You
that
like-
terribleness, yes.
You like tacos.
Yeah.
How many of you like tacos? Can you will yourself to not like tacos?
I mean, you can will yourself to not get tacos, but I don't think you can will yourself to not like them.
I mean, if
once
you put something
already-
like you don't like in the taco, then you cannot like that specific.
Taco.
Yeah, but like overall, I like tacos.
See, I got food poisoning at Wendy's, and Wendy's was my favorite fast food burger place
Until you got food poisoning.
until I got food poisoning, and now
And then
I
it was
close
all
off
over.
every time I drive by.
I was wondering who actually goes to Wendy's.
I know, it's kind of like Long John Silver's. I'm like, does anybody ever eat at Long John Silver's?
I
No,
like
it's just
Wendy's,
there.
but now I'm.
Do what?
Yeah, now I'm
Yeah, I mean, I was hospitalized. They like tested me for E. coli and all kinds.
Yeah, don't tell me that. You just ruined my Wendy's experience.
Don't worry, Frosties are so cool, I think.
I've never been to Wendy's. I don't think.
Oh,
Hey, don't
man.
go.
You're missing out.
No, I'm definitely not going.
You're missing out. Can you will yourself to not, you can will yourself to not eat the taco, but a psychological egoist would say the reason that you didn't eat the taco is because you want something more than the taco.
Like, what about money?
Yeah, you want money
Everybody
more.
wants money, everybody
Right.
can agree that here, that we're all striving to have a better job so we can get
Right.
more money.
Yeah. Overwhelmingly, that's why people go to college. We know that people with college degrees make more on average. And if you get a sales degree, you're gonna make a lot more than average, probably, than other people. You go over again to the land of the liberal arts over there, and you get yourself a degree in philosophy, you're probably not gonna make a lot of money. You don't know what you're gonna do with that degree. Probably gonna starve to death. But hey, you'll be well educated while you're starving to death. That's why I didn't get a degree in philosophy. So, okay, I'm gonna have to stop the recorder. It stopped it. I guess I'm gonna have to just turn it on manually. Stupid
Your
phone.
phone die that fast?
Yeah, I need it.
You need
Brand
a
new
charger?
No, I'll just start
My
this
battery's full, we need a brand new phone.
that way, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
That works.
Yeah.
So, what psychological egoists will say is that we are inherently selfish, that we will always engage in selfish behavior, and that we should recognize that and we should use people's selfishness to come up with ways that we can encourage them to behave in a cooperative way. Rather than viewing things as a zero-sum game, we should encourage cooperation. Now, the problem with psychological egoism, and again, this is very difficult because if you think about it, you could have a series of infinite, you want something more. You don't eat the tacos because you want to be healthy more than you want the tacos, or you want to avoid food poisoning more than you want the tacos, or you don't have the money and so you want, to avoid, poverty, and so you don't eat the tacos. But the psychological egoist would say those are things that you didn't want. You couldn't will yourself to not want or want either. You just wanted them more. The problem with this is that it engages in what we call the logical fallacy of equivocation. It says that two things are the same that are not necessarily the same. It conflates motivation with the feelings or emotions that follow from an act. So, psychological egoists would say that there is no such thing as altruism. Altruism is only us wanting to help our fellow man because we feel good about it. Mother Teresa was not really a saint. She was just doing what she wanted to do because God told her to, and she wouldn't want to disobey God. And she probably got all kinds of good, happy feelings from helping the world's poorest and most neglected and abandoned people. But that's not the same thing as the motivation for doing it. The feelings that follow is not the motivation. And so if we accepted psychological egoism as true, A, we would be engaging in a logical fallacy of equivocation. And we would also basically be saying that we're punishing people for things that they have no control over. And I don't think that that's true. We can't have control over things. We can have control over our lives. Not to a perfect extent, but to some extent we can. So those are three challenges. You see them used a lot, though, by business people. And so you have to be aware of them as we think about how we should behave. In engaging in ethical marketing communication with our constituents, clients, customers, patients, etc. So the problems with the challenges that you should know for a test is that they're emotive, they're based on emotion. Subjectivism allows me to say it's my ideas, my feelings that are all that matters. Subjectivism allows you to say that it's my society's feelings or beliefs that matter. We're superior. So they're not rational. If they're based on emotion, they're not rational, and they allow for exceptionalism. So those are the three things that make these challenges not valid ethical theories. And so on an exam and on essays and things like that, if I ask you to give me a rational response, you cannot use these three theories as a defense for the conduct that you want to engage in, because they are emotive, not rational, and allow for exceptionalism. Well, what makes a valid ethical theory then? Well, it's one that is the opposite of those three things. It is non-emotive, it is rational, and it doesn't allow for exceptionalism. It doesn't allow you to say, I'm special, I'm unique, or my society is special and we're unique. So valid ethical theories will be based on rational, comprehensive thought and non-exceptionalism and not emotively charged language as we think about these kinds of ads and issues that we'll look at in this class. So the valid ethical theories are based on reason, not emotive, and don't allow for exceptionalism. And I posted these PowerPoints so you can have them on D2L. I did manage to get them up today. I've had a problem with my office computer. Did I tell you all this last time? I didn't post the PowerPoints, and I had intended to get them up before, and they just figured out what was wrong with my office computer. I was trying to upload everything into D2L, but apparently I only have one data port in my office, and so people who only have one data port in their office, the phone line actually goes into the computer, and then the computer goes through the phone, and the phone was restricting the amount of data that could go out from my computer, so it was just not sending the data packets out, and so they had to wire around that for me so that I could send out from my computer. So I apologize for not getting those posted before now, but they are up there now. I got them posted today. I uploaded them in class, right before class. So what are the valid ethical theories? And I want you to remember that all of these theories have problems. They're not perfect, but they are, at least with regard to those three characteristics, all capable of surviving those challenges to those. So the oldest fully worked out philosophical theory that deals with all of the things that we're going to deal with in this class in terms of ethics and marketing, we can find in Republic, which was written by Plato. In Republic, we get the character of Socrates. We know about Socrates through his most famous student, which was Plato, who followed him around and wrote down what he said. And Plato says that all he did was write down and transcribe what Socrates said. He didn't add anything himself. I don't think we can believe that, because at the time they didn't have, obviously, the sort of court reporting stenographer machines that we have today, or computers. So I don't think we can take Plato at his word, but that's what he says. Socrates was never wrote anything down. He was a gadfly, walked around Athens asking hard questions. He would never have gotten tenure at a college today because he never published anything, unlike Plato and Aristotle. He just sort of walked around and thought about these questions like, what is the meaning of life? What is it that constitutes a good society? And the first fully worked out one that we know is Republic. There may be older examples of philosophies that were predate Plato, and we have evidence of them, but the one that answers all three of those questions, what is it we can know, how can we know it, what is the good life, what is the ethical life, and what is the right form of government, is Republic. Now again, there may be others that we have not discovered that are pre-Platonic, but that is the first that really works this out in a nice way. Republic is one of those works that if you're interested in reading, and when I used to teach in the land of hippy dippy across the way, I used to have a reading list of, from time to time, students would ask me what I should have read to be truly educated, and I have a list. If you're interested in that, I'd be happy to provide you with the list, and on the list is Republic. You should have read it. It's a relatively easy work to read. It's written like a play, so you have a character of Socrates, and it starts out at a party, and he's approached by some people, and he strikes up a conversation, and this question of what is justice is the first question that they really deal with, and the interlocutors come and go throughout the party, and they come up with lots of different things, and he works out this idea of justice. Now for Plato, unlike those of you in here who said that ethics is subjective, he thought it was absolutely objective. He said that there is an absolute objective truth out there, and most people are not going to be able to know it, but there are some people who can know it, and those people are going to be called philosophers, and they will be able to see this through the mind's eye and through rational thought in the realm of the form. So for example, Plato says, or Socrates says in Republic, that in the realm of the forms there is a perfect idea of everything. So there is a perfect idea of a table. This table is a mere copy of a perfected table that exists in the realm of the forms. And in Republic you get the greatest allegory of all time, and it's called the Allegory of the Cave, and you all should know that. If you want to be truly educated, you should know what the Allegory of the Cave is, and you should look it up. You can find it on Wikipedia. They do a very good job of sort of describing it. And that's what you get as the absolute sense of justice. This person who sees with clear vision the absolute conception of these ideas. The one that students like the most, that's the least abstract of the valid theories. So Plato comes up with this whole system of government that's based on this idea of the philosopher kings, and an entire economic system that flows from that. And by the way, what you can tease out of Republic is the idea, or the philosophical foundations for communism are found in Republic. Aristotle didn't think that that was necessarily the best and only form of government. He had a different way of looking at things. But the one that's most concrete and is probably a product of Aristotelian thought that comes down to us is the Utilitarian Ethic. And that one is the one that most business students like the most because it's the one that's most familiar to them. And it's the one that our capitalist system is most predicated on. So in economic terms, we have Adam Smith who comes up with the idea of the invisible hand of the market and the idea of the efficient market hypothesis. You all have heard of this somewhere along the way. Of course, economists are going to be horribly, just like the biologists are going to be horrified by my stripping down of biology and genetics to X and Y chromosomes. They'll tell you that there's a whole lot more to it than that in the human genome. Economists are going to be horrified by my simplifying Adam Smith and this idea. So the idea is that private goods, particularly, the most efficient way to distribute them is to the person who is willing to pay the most for them. And they'll put that private good to the highest and best use. You are willing to pay a lot for this device, and maybe you're willing to pay more for an Apple device than someone who's not, because you're going to put it to a better use than someone who's only willing to pay for an inferior communist-style Android phone. Because we all know that Apple's the bomb, right? Dating myself again, because I'm using words that, like the bomb is my generation. Probably got something else that you said, sick. Is that what you right? What? That's a couple years old too
Yeah,
now?
six a little dated too.
Six a little dated?
It's okay. It's all good.
Okay.
We know what you mean.
So dope. Apple's dope.
Dope, okay.
Dope.
Yeah, Apple dope.
I actually don't think that Apple is sick or the bomb or dope or whatever the current term is. What is this dope? Is that it? Is that
Sure, that'll
I
work.
mean, that works.
Oh, you all want to hide it from me. You want to play the peanut game with your professor, like, oh, don't tell the old guy what the current hipster term is for this stuff. Of course, I'm not sure I want to know, because I'm not sure I want to be a hipster. I look at these people with great disdain. So, just to let you know. But I actually don't think Apple's all that great. The reason I use it and the reason I like it is because I have a niece and nephew, and their mother has an Apple, and it's easy to FaceTime with them. And so, I mean, you could do something similar on an Android platform, but it's not as easy and as streamlined as the Apple, and so that's the reason I have the Apple phone. But, you know, this is a more expensive device than what you can get. So let's say you're somebody who's 75 years old, and landlines have sort of gone the way of the dodo anymore, although there are some people who still have them. You know, they're not willing to pay the price for this device that I'm willing to pay for it, because they're not going to use it as much. How many of you have seen all the ads out there for, you don't need unlimited, you know, why do you want a plan that has all the stuff that you don't need? And lots of people don't need, you know, they're not in business, they're retired maybe, and they don't need an unlimited plan that costs $100 a month for unlimited talk, text, and data. And they want to pay $20 a month, because all they need is basically something that they can open up and dial that looks like, you know, something that I remember from the past that allows them to talk, because that's what they want to do. I mean, I actually don't talk very much on this device because we don't talk on phones anymore. I've come to embrace texting. I really like to, I tell students, text me. I hate email, it's too long, you get winded. And I mean, you give me these long explanations that I don't want to hear, you know, of things. You know, everything that happened to you during the day and the reason that you're not, no, just tell me I'm sick. You know, keep it to 120 characters or less. I like text. I'm very upset that Twitter is now at 240 characters.
Yep.
Yeah, I liked it when it was less. Keep it to that. Keep it to 100 characters or less. You know. Can't make it to class today. Sick. Great. Fantastic. Don't need to know more than that. But I actually don't talk. But you know, people that are older actually talk on these devices. And so I'm willing to pay more because what I want is I want to be able to control my camera, although today this is a big fail because the battery went dead so quickly. Big fail, Apple, by the way. Battery sucks. Because I want to be able to control my camera, I want to be able to text, I want to be able to get on Facebook and post. I want to be able to get on YouTube and post the videos of my cute squirrel that I have. I have a pet squirrel. She's great. She's the greatest pet I've ever had, and I've had all kinds of pets. She's the greatest.
They're really good pets.
They are really good pets.
We've had
They're really remarkably good pets.
I have a squirrel.
Yeah, they're really good pets. They're very entertaining.
That sounds kind of
My squirrel knows 35 words, which is more than you all will know on test day. Trust me. Yeah. She does. She's very bright. 35 whole words. Let's see if you can come up with 35 words on the first test. So, you know, I mean, there's a lot of things that I want to do. I'm willing to pay more for this device and more for the plan because I'm going to put it to a better use than somebody who's retired and only wants to be able to call their friends and talk because they still actually want to talk to somebody. They don't want to text. Who wants to be able to, if it's an emergency, dial 911, things like that. And they don't need this phone. And so I'll put this to the greatest and best use. So in economic terms, we call this the maximization of utility. Economists are fascinated with the maximization of utility. And I'm out of time, so I'll have to stop there and we'll continue this next time and hopefully get into chapter 2. So I'll mark down that we stopped with